participativa donde todos los alumnos eran también profesores o profesoras. Es de sobra conocida la obra de él y se ha convertido en un referente en cuanto a nos invita a pensar la comunicación de otra manera. De una manera, él es el emergente de lo que muchos hacíamos en otras partes del mundo. Entonces, esta es una buena oportunidad para tenerlo aquí, disfrutar de ese jugamos que nos plantea, ese Shall We Play, y luego hacer las preguntas, comentarios y reflexiones para que aprendamos y disfrutemos y juguemos todos juntos. Gracias, Henry.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Let me turn that off. Thanks for that warm introduction. I'm delighted to be here in Madrid and particularly honored to be following on Gunther Kress, whose work has had a huge impact on myself and my team and the way we think about media. So it's great to once again be in the same space with Roberto and Gunther and some of the other speakers on the program today. I'm going to, as the title suggests, talk about play and the relationship of play to education. And I was struck in the last session, we got a question about young people using the internet for fun and how that relates to school. And that very much is the heart of what I'm trying to talk about today. So what I want to begin by saying what this talk is not about, because there's so many conversations about new media literacies in the United States today. And I want to sort out what I'm talking about from what I'm not talking about. So first of all, this is not a talk about teaching with technology. As Roberto said, I spent 20 years at MIT, and technology is the first solution that most MIT people throw at a problem. And teachers in the United States are sold one piece of technology after another as the solution to education. But I think what we need to do is change how we think about socially, how we think culturally, and then apply that to whatever technology we have available to us. I think if it's about the technology, then many schools are given freedom to do nothing, right? Because they don't have technology. They don't have one laptop per child. They have no laptop per child. They have one laptop per school, one laptop per classroom. So in that context, I think it becomes very, very important to move beyond the technology and focus on the skills, the ways of thinking that we apply to technology. And if we have no technology, we still teach new ways of thinking. So one of my students was teaching in Senegal a couple of summers ago, and she was teaching new media literacies, and the generator went down in the town where she was teaching, and it didn't go up for the entire summer when she was trying to teach. So she was teaching a course about new media in a school which had no electricity. And so she used clotheslines to create a space where kids could talk about the web and share how ideas were organized on the web, and were able to help them think about new ways, new modes of thinking, rather than simply using new technology. This is also not a talk about games-based learning, right? I was part of a group at MIT that worked with Kurt Squire, and we've developed a lot of games and prototypes for games for learning. It was called Games to Teach, and later the Education Arcade. And there was enormous interest right now in games as a model of learning. But I want us to move us beyond games to think about play as a mentality, a spirit, an attitude that we bring into our classroom. This is not a talk about gamification. So right now, the big discussion in the United States about games and learning has been reduced to, if we give point values to doing things that kids should be doing, will they be motivated to do it? And that has shifted the conversation from intrinsic motivation, using games to allow kids to explore things they're interested in, to extrinsic motivation, using point systems to force kids to do things they didn't want to do otherwise. Well, our schools are already gamified, right? Our kids play for grades, right? We've always given points to kids to do things that we want them to do. That's not a change. The change is opening up an attitude where they can play, where they can explore their passions, where learning grows out of the child's interest, not out of the school's interest. That would be a change in the system. This is also not a talk about badges, right? In the American context, this year's hot topic has been Can we take informal learning and use badges, marks of recognition, to credentialize what young people are learning outside of the classroom? And I'm a great believer in informal learning, the kinds of learning that kids have in participatory culture, in game communities, in fan communities. But I'm skeptical of bringing badges into that system. That right now what's beautiful about that system is kids pursue their interest wherever they lead them, not following rules and curriculums created by adults. What's powerful about that space is adults and kids meet as equals because they share a passion, and adults learn from kids and kids learn from adults in those spaces. But the minute we create badges, we create a system where adults give rewards to kids and they teach kids, and we're back to imposing on the informal learning environment the structures of the classroom. So what we want to do is not bring the classroom into the play, but bring play into the classroom. And that's very much the spirit of what we're talking about. So this is a talk about play, about the value of play. And this is a picture of young children learning, right? Learning all kinds of things, playing in the sandbox, playing with each other. They're learning about the materials of the world around them, the sand. They're learning about the process of building something. They're learning social skills of not throwing sand in each other's eyes or, whatnot. That they're learning from a variety of things in that setting, and that play can, be applied to adults. So this one, I was in Brazil, in Rio, saw these extraordinary sandcastles on the beaches of Rio that adults have made, using skills that they probably learned the first time in the sandbox, right? So we can see things that adults can do growing out of the things they played at children. And this is the way play has always worked in our culture, that we learn through play those things that we will then apply as adults. So I'm interested in the work of Bruno Bettelheim, the child psychologist, who wrote in Harper's Magazine quite late in his career about what he saw as the difference between play and games. And right now we're all excited about games as a way of motivating learning, but Bettelheim was critical of games and what the structures they imposed on children, and he celebrated a more open structure of play. So he wrote, generally speaking, play refers to the young child's activities characterized by freedom from all but personally imposed rules, which are changed at will, shaped by freewheeling fantasy involvement, and by the absence of any goals outside the activities themselves. You can see this is very different from gamification and the attitude that it describes. Games, however, are usually competitive and are characterized by agreed upon, often externally imposed rules, by a requirement to use the implements of the activity in the manner for which they were intended, and not as fancy suggests, and frequently by a goal or purpose outside the activity, such as winning the game. So for Bettelheim, learning to play the game is about learning to play within the rules. And that's valuable, right? It's valuable to learn how to play with other people. It's valuable to learn how to create goals and succeed at goals imposed by others. But again, schools have always been about that. What's radical is bringing free play into the school, allowing kids to build on their own interest, to pursue their creativity. And that's, I think, what we want to do. So Bettelheim continues, children recognize early on that play is an opportunity for pure enjoyment, whereas games may involve considerable stress. So we see here two kids playing spontaneously on the playground, doing what they want to do on the playground equipment. And we see cheating kitty secretly moves while you're not watching, right? The kitten's cheating at the game. You don't cheat at play because the goals and rules are not imposed upon you. You cheat at games because you have to find a way to assert your own interest outside the rules of the game. So in a sense, cheating is a mechanism of working through a system that you didn't design. Whereas play, there's no cheating, there's only creativity. Schools have often seen play as a distraction or a disruption, right? The idea of the class clown who distracts from teaching is something that's disorderly and destroys learning. Yet outside of school, play is how we learn. And the psychologist Jean Piaget tells us Play is the work of childhood. Not play as opposed to work, but play is work. Play is learning. Play is the way we make sense of the world. We play with the materials of our environment. So play is central to what I call participatory culture. And this is the idea of participatory culture that's in the white paper I wrote for the MacArthur Foundation some 6 years ago, where I say participatory culture is one where there are relatively low barriers for engagement, where there's strong support for sharing your creations with others, where there's informal mentorship, where more experienced people help new people learn. And I put it that way because sometimes it's adults helping kids, and sometimes it's kids helping adults learn in these kinds of interest-driven communities, where members believe their contributions matter, and where they care about each other's opinions of themselves and their work. That creates an environment where powerful learning takes place. And I meant that to describe the fan communities I've been part of, the gaming communities that people like Kurt Squire or James Paul G study. These are spaces where we learn from each other. And I continued, not every member must contribute, but all must believe they're free to contribute when ready, and that what they contribute will be appropriately valued. So the idea is not that everyone's free to participate, but that everyone does participate, but we're free to participate. This is the space that Jean Lave talks about as the zone of legitimate peripheral participation. That some people are joining in, some people are watching and learning how to join, but there's a difference between being structurally blocked from being able to participate and not yet feeling ready to participate. And that we have to make that distinction as we think about a participatory culture. Now, this slide itself is an example of participatory culture, because some years ago I typed the word participatory culture into Google image search, and up popped the slide that someone had made for one of their talks. Someone had made the slide to represent my ideas, but it was a better slide than I was going to make. And so I took their slide and incorporated it into my talk. And this is the way participatory cultures grow. We throw our ideas out into the world. Other people build on them, improve upon them, remix them, and give them back to the world. And maybe we take them back and add some more to them, as I'm doing in making comments on the slide that are maybe different from the other speakers' comments on the slide. But that process, the generative process, is part of how we create and how we learn in the participatory culture world that we live in. Now, I should be clear that the moment we're at now is one that is moving toward a more participatory culture. A lot of my writing calls a participatory culture, and I now want to insist on a more participatory culture because many people still are not able to participate. And we have to hold on to an awareness of both the digital divide in terms of access to technology and the participation gap in terms of access to skills, learning, and opportunities to participate. We may close the digital divide. We may give access to technology, but unless we also close the participation gap, there will be many people who cannot participate. And so we really want to stress the move toward more participation, but the continued struggle to ensure opportunities to participate for every member of our society. So what do we mean by participation in this culture? Well, in the white paper, we've sort of building in the white paper, my team now talks about 4 core kinds of participation. And the first of these is creation, to create something. So this is Fiction Alley. It's a website for Harry Potter fans. And young people and adults alike write stories about Harry Potter, some very short, some full-length novels, some much longer than publishable novels. And they share them online, and what's important is they give each other feedback on what they write. So there's a whole system in place for informal feedback on the students' writing, on the fans' writing, that allows these writers to grow. So they may begin very, very bad as writers. They're not great writers, but they're writing anyway. And they get feedback, and they get better as writers. But they get more feedback in this community than they get from their teachers in the classroom, right? The teacher in the classroom says, "A, very good job," end of discussion. Whereas here, they get many, many comments because they're communicating within a community that shares their passions and interests. And so I see this as a much better school for writing than most writing instruction in the classroom today. Second is connect. right? Part of learning in today's environment is connecting with a community of other people who share your interest, finding that community, navigating the differences in that community, learning to communicate with each other is a second dimension of participatory culture that's very, very important for learning. Third is collaborate, right? Building things together, pooling knowledge, creating collective intelligence through your learning process is part of this participatory culture. And the example here is Second Life, which maybe is a little dated as an example now. Second Life's not as strong as it was, but it was a space where people taught each other how to build things and learn from each other how to build things. And finally, the one that I'm stressing most right now in my own work is circulation. So the book that I have coming out in January called Spreadable Media, Creating Meaning and Value in a Network Culture, is about how media travels through the new networked ecology, how we share media with each other, how people choose which media to pass along. And that itself is a skill of participation. That, the ability to choose media and meaningfully contribute it to a conversation by sharing links with each other is a kind of media literacy. I think that's a little bit of what Gunther was just talking about in the previous talk. And that act of circulation is one that we're very, very interested in right now. The latest work coming out of the MacArthur Foundation's Digital Media and Learning Initiative emphasized what they call connected learning. And this is very much linked to what I'm calling participatory culture. So they're describing a world where young people have interests, things they want to pursue. They have a peer culture around them. Oops, wrong way. And they have an academic culture. The problem is right now for many kids, there are strong divisions between these three things. That is, their interests are not accepted by their friends and their peers. And their interests are not valued at school. And so the goal of the MacArthur Foundation's Connected Learning Initiative is to help us think through how we build the connection, the learning ecology that links the informal learning outside of the classroom, the after-school programs that we participate in with our friends through museums or libraries or public institutions, and the learning that takes place inside the classroom. How we bring those things together so the things that kids value outside of school are also valued in the classroom. So here's an example of where that's taken place. The MacArthur Foundation launched the school Quest to Learn in New York City, which uses game design activities and gameplay activities across the entire curriculum. The kids are encouraged from a very young age to think of themselves as designers and play with the knowledge that they are developing, turn it into something they can represent and express through games. And it's because it's a New York public school, it's not a private school, it's a public school, it's required to meet all of the educational standards of the state. But it's reorganized the curriculum to connect them to games-based learning in really powerful ways. And it's an example of what connected learning might look like. We've been exploring how we bring that kind of connected learning or play into the study of literature. I have a book coming out with my New Media Literacies team in December called Reading in a Participatory Culture. And it's about the work we've been doing thinking about traditional literature in the classroom. And it's very much inspired by this man, Ricardo Fitzwiley, the African-American theater director from Rhode Island. And Ricardo was going into prisons and working with incarcerated youth, kids who read 2 to 3 years or more below their grade level, whose kids' system had given up on. And he asked them to read Herman Melville's great American novel, Moby Dick. Right? And this is 800, 900-page novel written in the 19th century, incredibly difficult text. When I read it in high school, I didn't get past the whiteness of the whale. I only got about halfway through the book and gave up and cheated on my paper about it. It's a hard book. And he got these prisoners to read it by asking them to rewrite it. What he said was, who would these characters be in the 21st century? What aspect of these characters connects to your own life? And so what the young people emerged from this creative process of each of them choosing a character in the novel and reimagining that character was that it became a story not about the whaling trade in the 19th century, but about the drug trade in the 21st century. And many of these kids were in jail because of the war on drugs. and drugs and gangs had played a central role in their lives. And so for them, Captain Ahab became a gang leader who's struggling with the business of selling drugs versus the vengeance that the system encourages. Someone's wiped out his family, and now he wants vengeance on the great white thing, and he's going after it. And so by asking them not to read the book to simply understand it, but to read the book to rewrite it, he encouraged a more playful attitude toward the novel, and it empowered these young prisoners to read the novel more deeply, to actually complete the novel. They were deeply motivated because now the novel connected to their own lives. And so we took his inspiration and designed a curriculum we taught in 6 schools around Herman Melville as a novelist and the remix culture of both the 19th and 21st century, and used what I knew about fan fiction along with what literary scholars knew about Melville's own writing practices to help kids think of the novel as itself a product of remix culture and to invite them to think about it in creative ways. The language Ricardo uses is, he says, we want to build a community of readers. That he wanted to create a space where lots of people were reading this book and taking parts of it back into their own lives and engaging with it creatively and critically. He wanted adults and young people to read the same books and talk to each other about it, and to read it as a community where no one knew everything, but each member had something to contribute that was fresh and new about reading this book. We've been going with the work we're doing at the USC Annenberg Innovation Lab, we've been taking this to an earlier age. This is a children's book called Flotsam. It's really for 5- and 6-year-olds. It's all pictures, but it's pictures that each picture is very evocative. It encourages to tell stories about the sea and the life that lives under the sea. And so every kid who reads the book tells a slightly different story because they see slightly different things in this book. The team at USC has been building a transmedia property around this book so that it encourages kids to both read the book, to reimagine the book, and it also involves sending tangible objects, seashells and sand and seaweed to kids who open up a box and they play physically with the materials of the sea. There's a photographic application where they can take their picture and insert it into a kind of large photo collage with other kids. There are lots of ways of playing with the book that encourages them to read it more creatively as well as more critically. As we think about what it means to bring play in the classroom, we should think about what are the properties of play that might be valuable for education. And I talk about these as the 6 Ps, but keep in mind these are English words. They begin with P in English. They probably don't begin with P in Spanish, so bear with me a little bit. But the first of these is permission. So children start playing and we have to tell them to stop. Adults, we have to give permission to play. We have to encourage them to play. So these adults playing Twister had to have a lot of encouragement probably to play that game as adults. So what we have to do in school is create an environment where it is okay to play. When we've worked with play with teachers, they often tell us that they needed to let go of a certain amount of control in order to allow playful learning to take place. And they talked about it as letting go or giving permission for play to take place because we banned play from school in many cases. The second thing is play values the process of learning more than the product, where standardized testing values the product of learning. So Eric Zimmerman, the game designer, talks about golf. And he says, if you want to simply meet the goal of golf, the product of golf, the simplest thing to do would walk up to the hole and put the ball inside the hole, right? Because the goal is to get the ball in the hole. It makes a lot of sense to walk up and put the ball there, right? And instead, we make it as hard as possible to put the ball in the hole. We have a stick and we try to hit the ball with a stick and we go a long way away from the hole, and maybe we have sand or water we have to work around, and we wear silly clothes and, all these things that make it really hard for us to put the ball in the hole. But the fun of the play is the difficulty of it. And in fact, when we make it all about the goal and not about the process, we overlook the degree to which we're drawn to difficulty. A kid will quit early with a homework assignment and they'll stay up all night to beat a level in the game that they're finding fun, right? That they're engaged with, they're motivated by the difficulty. The process is what motivates them to learn. But the process is in a different mental attitude when it's playful than when it's treated as a high-risk activity. The third is passion, right? Play encourages our emotion. Our emotions are connected with learning and play. So look at the two women in this photograph, right? One of them's in the classroom asleep. She's bored out of her mind. The other is doing something very simple. She's blowing bubbles, which you can see from her expression, how much she's into what she's doing at that moment. Now, I had a teacher once tell me, we're worried about bringing play and games into the classroom because if kids have fun all the time at school, how will they ever deal with boredom when they're adults? How will they ever be bored? Won't they be bored at work? Right? And our attitude was, if your goal is to prepare kids for boredom, then our schools are succeeding better than any school ever before. Right? We're boring our kids out of their mind. The challenge is not to prepare kids for boring work, but to prepare kids for a creative society. And so tapping their passions ought to be part of what we do to prepare them for the workplace of tomorrow. The fourth P is productivity. That is, if I wasn't trying to force into the P, I'd say generativity. That is, look at these kids in 1960s New York. These are kids who had nothing. These are kids of the street, the very poorest of the poor. But they're creatively engaging with the environment around them. Every space is there for them to play with. Every item in their environment is looked at as a resource that they can use in their play. And so an enormous amount of creative response comes out of their playful mental attitude as they look at the world around them. It's an experimental mode, an innovative mode that play is creating. Number 5 is participation, right? To participate is a social experience. When we play by ourselves, we often think of it as rehearsal for playing with someone else. So there is a father and son playing by throwing ball back and forth. And the kid's not very good at throwing a ball yet, but it's about the relationship he's building with his father in doing that. Or we might picture a kid throwing the ball at the wall and catching it, but thinking about throwing the ball at someone else. Or these kids sitting on the sideline watching the game, but waiting to get into the action, are also participating in the game because they're part of the social community that's involved with play. And that social connection to learning is a very important part of what we learn by thinking about learning through the lens of play. And finally, we talk about pleasure. These are the expressions of people and animals at play. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're having a good time. And the problem is often schools strip the pleasure out of learning, the satisfaction out of learning, the accomplishment out of learning. And part of bringing play back into school is bringing those attitudes back into the learning process so we have a good time. We're laughing as we're learning. And laughing is not disruption, it's part of the process. It's a byproduct of our sense of satisfaction of accomplishing something we didn't know we could do. So as we think about bringing play into the classroom, we talk about participatory learning. These are the traits we identify for a participatory classroom, a classroom where play is valued. The first of those is connection, that what we learn inside of school is connected in meaningful ways to what takes place outside of school. And that's the connected learning idea that I talked about just a minute ago. Second is creativity. The kid is not just encouraged to learn or master something that's predetermined, but they're encouraged to create, experiment, and innovate inside the classroom. The third is co-configured expertise. If we think about the fan world, where the adults and young people are learning from each other because they share a common interest, that's what we want to bring into the classroom. The teacher should be learning, the student should be teaching. That relationship of learning and teaching together is part of what allows the social dimensions of play to come back into the classroom. We also want to capture that passion and pleasure of learning through understanding what motivates students, what brings about enjoyment, what brings about engagement. The engagement is not always fun, but it's motivated, right? It's deep. So when you're playing a game, there are certain moments in the game that are very difficult and very frustrating. To play a video game, you often have to do the same thing over and over and fail and fail and fail until you succeed. But we still enjoy it because it's so well motivated. Our goals are well defined, We know what it is to succeed. We're working really hard to succeed, and we're willing to deal with the difficulty. Whereas when we get problems from school, we often don't know why we're doing it, what we're getting out of learning it. We often don't know what the purpose of the activity is. Our goals and roles are not clearly defined, and so the notion of motivation is not tapped into the process in the ways in which we design our activities. Relevance, again, it's tied to things we already care about. That what we learn outside of school is valued in the classroom. That our engagement with popular culture may be tapped by the teacher in such a way that the student's expertise in another domain is brought into school and connected in a meaningful way to what's learning in the classroom. And the cat here says, this is relevant to my interest. And at school, we have to find a way to make what we do at school relevant to the interest of the student. This is what Gunther Kress was talking about, a choice society. Young people want to choose what they learn and how they learn, not because they're lazy, but because they've already developed a certain kind of expertise outside of school that they get recognized for in their own community. And they want to show that expertise at school, and they want to use it as an entry point into the things school wants them to learn. So this is the school where I'm working some these days. This is a school in South Central Los Angeles, the neighborhoods where some of the LA riots were held 20 years ago. The neighborhood where the school is located is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and also very much a Latino-based neighborhood. Mostly it's children of immigrants who've moved north from South and Central America in the Los Angeles area, many of whom are undocumented youth, people who are in the United States illegally and often looked down upon by other Americans. This is called the Robert F. Kennedy School, and the Robert F. Kennedy School is at the location of the Ambassador Hotel. The Ambassador Hotel was the hotel where Robert Kennedy was shot and killed when he was running for president in 1968. The Kennedy family didn't want that hotel to be preserved with a plaque in it. They wanted it to be turned into a resource, something that continued the missions of the things Robert F. Kennedy cared about. And so he sought to build a space for community, for communication, for learning. And they developed a school. You see that bottom mural there, that's Robert F. Kennedy talking to Cesar Chavez on the mural. So they sought to represent the culture of this neighborhood and connect it to the history of Robert F. Kennedy. And that's Robert F. Kennedy's son, one of his sons, Max, speaking to the students inside the school. So we are using the kitchen where Robert F. Kennedy died as the media center in the school, where we help young people, teachers, and the community acquire skills and using new media literacy. And we've turned that into a space of play and learning. So these are photographs from the after-school program we run and for the teacher professional development program we run, which we call Play for Participatory Learning and You. And we're trying to develop techniques and tools where teachers learn through playing and then translate that play into creative activities they use in school. It's not about prescriptions and formulas for activities. It's about creating a mental attitude around learning that teachers can incorporate into their classrooms. This is an example of how we're bringing that into the schools right now. This is MC Lars. MC Lars is a nerdcore performer. Nerdcore is a kind of very geeky white boy hip-hop that often takes as its themes technology, science fiction. But MC Lars is very interested in literature, right? He has a degree in literature from Oxford, and he, in fact, wants to find a way to connect hip-hop to what takes place in the classroom. So he's doing workshops with kids after school around hip-hop, and he's using hip-hop to get them interested in short stories and poems. And specifically, his project this semester has been getting these kids interested in the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and who he feels that is a lot of the rhythm of Poe's work is very strongly connected to the rhythms of hip-hop, he thinks, but the themes also speak to these groups. And so they did a project this semester around Masque of Red Death, Poe's short story, which is about the plague. And the plague hits modern Europe, and the poor are dying of the plague, and the rich prince holds a party for his friends safely behind the castle walls, and the people enjoy the party and great foods while outside everyone who's poor is dying. But the red plague comes in and kills everyone inside the palace. That's Poe's story. These young people were interested in that story as about the young people at risk, particularly Latino kids at risk in the poor neighborhoods of America. That they were at risk and the rich were having the party and leaving them behind. That behind closed doors in safe neighborhoods, celebrations were taking place and they were at risk of crime, of disease, of poverty, of hunger. And so they used that story to tell something of their own story and their own concerns. Now I'm going to play now a little bit of the video they created. The language is hard to understand in English, so I don't think you'll probably understand much of the language, but I wanted you to see the tone, the look, the feel, the spirit of this video. That's their celebration of translating the works of Edgar Allan Poe into a more playful engagement with literature. So if we can play the video now. Here we go.
Crash a party, ended up a good dance to everybody. The red band will crash a party, ended up a good dance to everybody. Damn, there be chicks everywhere, drinks in the air, stuff in the hair. Run from the sin and what does he wear? Where does he go? Is he really there? So let me just run away to the I got 9 lives in my state. Secondhand got me elevated out of my place. Set me waiting for me when I touch down. Destiny coming the corner around, deciding whether I shall not abound. Saying where I do be shadowing the ground. Damn, he's here, should I resume?
There's the Red Death coming in.
Running away from the food
So part of the reason I wanted to share this is because these are young people who feel they have no voice in the culture. And part of our mission was not only to help them create this video, but to spread the video across the culture, to get it out in the world, to think about it circulating, to have these kids in Los Angeles know that teachers and educators in Spain are watching the work that they did and that they're engaging in some way with their project. That we brought this, MC Lars brought this to one of the TED conferences recently, and his TED video will talk about the making of this video and what he's trying to do and helping young people think about the works of Edgar Allan Poe. So if we can, we'll end it now because, as I said, the language is really impossible for people to understand. But I wanted you to at least see a little bit of it. But it's basically the theme of it is the Red Death will crash your party, which is part of the message about the moment of Occupy, the moment of struggle, the increasing awareness of the 99% and the 1% in American society. So part of what we're doing now is a toolkit that supports playful learning. And we're building this toolkit around the notion of challenges, right? So we take the idea of challenge in part from challenge-based learning, which is a kind of open-ended investigative structure. We take it partially from the idea of challenges in games. But more than that, we take it as challenge as in a challenge dance. And in hip-hop and tap dance, performers gather around and watch each other dance. And as that happens, one of them will do a really spectacular move, turn to the other crowd and say, "What do you think?" And the crowd claps, but then he says, "Your turn," and hands it off to someone else. And someone else takes it, reproduces the dance moves, adds their own dance moves, makes it a little more difficult, and it goes around the circle that way. Well, that's what we think learning should be like. That is, people show what they can do. They challenge each other to respond to their work. They challenge each other to build on each other's work, and the challenge continues. So we wanted to build something we call the playground, which will be a digital platform where teachers and students alike can build multimedia activities or challenges around the things that interest them, the things that they're engaged with. Find ways to structure learning around that and share them with other educators to build networks, whether very small local networks within the school or larger networks within a school system, or even global networks where kids in Spain and the United States are sharing activities with each other. But to give them very simple tools that allow them to build their own activities and share them through social networks. So we've been trying this out with teachers in Los Angeles. We've been very successful at getting them to build activities, and they've done compelling things around everything from literature, like MC Lars or Ricardo Pizzwali is doing, to we had one teacher go to the Occupy Los Angeles site and have kids take photo essays and videos and interview people and bring that back and incorporate it into their learning. Or look at what's going on with the DREAM Act in the United States, where undocumented youth are using new media to organize and support of their rights as citizens and learners in American society and build that into the platform. So we're seeing everything from school-based materials to political activism to fan interest to gaming interest can be incorporated into this platform and used in a way that can be shareable across sites and provide models for other educators to think about how they bring playful learning into their classroom. The challenge is that we can do this in a digital environment, but our schools are going in the exact opposite direction in the United States. And it sounds like from people I've talked to here in Spain as well, right? That we've wired the classroom over the last 20 years, and then we disabled the computer. So what we found in American schools is we put computers and network computers in the classroom, and we told ourselves this is the way poor people would overcome the digital divide. They would have access to network computing technologies as a powerful space for learning. And then we put mandatory filters on those technologies so they couldn't access a lot of the materials of the web. So we found, for example, when we were doing the project on Moby Dick, the Indiana schools couldn't access any materials about Herman Melville because the title of his best novel had the word dick in it, right? And this is an obscene word in the English language, so the school filters blocked everything that had the word dick in it. So the school computer was on the level of a sniggering 5-year-old who said, "Ha, you said dick," and cut it out, right? That was the level of the school filtering technology. We've seen that the schools have disabled social media in many cases. Facebook, MySpace is not allowed in school. Twitter and blog tools and LiveJournal are not allowed in schools. We found in Los Angeles that teachers weren't able to use YouTube in the classroom. They had a workaround. They could punch in a very complicated code and authorize each video when they showed it, but the code only lasted for 30 minutes. So if you began a 60-minute period, you couldn't queue up all your clips and have them ready to go. You had to stop teaching and punch in the code and access the video right then and there, which strongly discouraged teachers from using YouTube materials in the classroom. We've seen schools discourage the use of Wikipedia, which is a powerful space of learning. In Indiana, we had a classroom of kids add to the Herman Melville entry in Wikipedia and then get challenged about the entry, ask questions about it, debate online whether the information they were providing was reliable or not, and defend their changes online. And sometimes they stuck, sometimes they didn't, but they felt a sense of themselves as producers of knowledge, not just consumers of knowledge in that way. But our schools have discouraged Wikipedia and most of the other activities of the new participatory culture online. So our challenge is to move beyond the fear and to engage teachers in these technologies and these processes in powerful ways to connect to the things they want to learn. And that's the goal of the work we're doing with new media literacies in American school. So I will end my formal remarks there.
Iniciamos un turno de preguntas, reflexiones, comentarios. ¿Quién quiere comenzar? ¿Sí?
Hola, profesor Jenkins.
Hola.
Hola. Yo soy Alex, soy un alumno del máster y además representante de un grupo de alumnos del máster que nos llamamos TechNews 4. Vale, mi pregunta, leyendo tu libro, el primer capítulo de Fans, Blogueros y Videojuegos, tienes una conversación con Matt Hills, una entrevista, en la que tú hablas de que el significado está ligado a los afectos y a las emociones. Y que una cosa que te interesa mucho en tu obra es esa especie de semiótica que está muy relacionado también con juego, en realidad. Entonces, después dices que echas en falta un lenguaje en el ámbito académico y científico para describir las emociones. Me gustaría, esto es de 2001. Han pasado 10 años, me gustaría ver o saber qué piensas de la evolución, si se ha desarrollado un lenguaje, y también preguntarte concretamente qué piensas de la obra de Antonio Damasio. Nada más.
I don't know enough about Dabasi to speak specifically to that author, but I do think we're struggling as the academy to connect what we think and teach to our own everyday lives and our own passions. And that's part of the problem of bringing play into the classroom. That we've often taught ourselves that just as we imagine an opposition between work and play, we imagine an opposition between emotion and rationality. When in fact when we learn, those things are powerfully combined. The most powerful learning moments are ones we're passionate about, where we feel strong emotions, and we remember them because they were very emotional moments for us, that we laughed, we cried, we felt some satisfaction, we felt pride. Those are the moments we carry with us into our adult life. And so as scholars, I'm very interested in holding on to the fan within the scholar, or the fan within the activist, the things that motivated us were our feelings and our emotions and our connections to the culture around us. And so I, in my own writing, use the term acafan to describe that hybrid identity of the academic and the fan who brings those worlds together. And as teachers, we have to be in touch with both our own emotional experiences and response and those of our students. We have to look for those moments where our students are feeling something strong and build on that, amplify it, help them to articulate what they're feeling and why they're feeling, and to connect that to the things that they're learning. And that's very much the spirit of the kind of playful learning that I just spoke about.
Profesor Gabelas.
Una de las características de la cultura de la participación has comentado que era la capacidad de conexión. ¿De qué manera ves que esa capacidad de conexión está cambiando y ha cambiado el modelo de comunicación y el modelo de educación? ¿Y qué relaciones o qué conexiones estableces entre la capacidad de conexión y la ubicuidad?
All right, so I would say our ability to connect is changed in two fundamental ways. The first of those is our capacity to maintain connections with people in a mobile society. In the 1960s, Alvin Toffler in Future Shock warned that Americans would develop disposable relationships, that we would not know the person across the hall from us, we'd not know our neighbors, because we wouldn't want to invest a lot of time in people we'd only know for a few years. Because he said Americans were moving more and more from one city to the next, from one state to the next. We were a highly mobile society, and he feared that would destroy the life of American communities. What we see in the age of Facebook is quite the opposite, that all the people I knew in high school that I lost touch with after I moved away are gradually finding their way back together again, because we can hold on to our social connections as we move from place to place, and that allows us to cement social connections for a lifetime in a society which is still highly mobile. The second is we're connecting with people who we don't know face to face, who are not in our geographic area, but who we share common interest with. And again, this was possible in the age of post offices, and other earlier media, but it's much more easy to do now for kids to find a community of interest. So if there's no one in their community who cares about the same things they care about, they're still able to connect with those people and begin to enter into a learning process. So I remember some years ago I was visiting a grocery store in the North Georgia mountains, and there was a young girl there who had a Japanese name on her tag, but she was clearly Irish, American, Appalachian stock. And the guy in front of me was trying to understand why she had a Japanese name, and it turns out she was a fan of Japanese anime, Japanese comics, and was very connected with a global network of other fans. And then after the guy left, I mentioned that I also like Japanese manga, and she was shocked because she didn't know anyone in the small town in Georgia she was from who was interested in the same thing she was, but she had learned powerful things by connecting to that larger community and connecting with kids in Japan over her interest. So I think those two ways, connecting allows us to maintain a set of social relationships and to extend the networks through which we learn. The problem is our schools often cut us off from the rest of the world. They're not ways of connecting to the community, to the research and skills of the parents, of other experts around us, of other experts we could meet online. They're often protected spaces closed off from the larger communities we're parts of. And so what I want to do is reverse that, use network technologies to bring all kinds of expertise and communities together, to connect schools together around the world so that kids learn from each other. The language programs at MIT, as Roberto probably knows, have long done this around Spanish language and French language. They connect kids in Spain or Latin America to kids in the United States, encourage them to share media with each other, to share text with each other. The Spanish kids speak in Spanish, write in Spanish. The American kids write in English, but they have to translate and read each other's text, and they read their text as representatives of their cultures. And that sense of exchange through networks is a powerful way to have people learn immersively language and culture, even if they're not able to travel to these countries and immerse themselves fully in the cultures. They have a deeper understanding of it through connected communication than was possible before. When I was learning language, we could only learn Spanish or French from a textbook. We couldn't learn it or a tape. We couldn't learn it by engaging with people from those countries online. And I think that supports powerful forms of learning where teachers are ready to embrace it.
Esta experiencia que comenta el profesor Jenkins, aquí en el Máster de Comunicación y Educación en la Red, la está desarrollando el profesor Adolfo Plasencia con el profesor Douglas Morgenstern del MIT. Es una aclaración para que busquéis conexiones de los dos ámbitos. Si algún comentario, preguntas. ¿Seguimos jugando? Sí, Mitch.
Hello, thank you very much, Professor Jenkins. My name is Mitch Peters. I'm a Canadian student doing research here in Spain, in Madrid. And I'm focusing a lot on media literacy. And, so one of my frames of reference is media literacy education. And I find it quite interesting to be in Spain. I kind of find myself between two worlds, the Anglo-Saxon world and the Spanish-speaking world. And there are two sort of distinct traditions of media literacy education. And I'd like to have a comment perhaps about how you view these worlds interacting. Do you see a lot of convergence? You write a lot about convergence culture, about how old and new media converge. And I'm wondering how you see these two traditions, how they're interacting, how you see the fluidity between these two traditions of media education.
Well, I think I still have a lot to learn from the Spanish-speaking world and the Portuguese-speaking world in particular. And since moving to USC from MIT, I'm spending a lot more time in Latin America, where some of those traditions have been particularly strong. And I've been learning a lot from the work of Pablo Freire and some of the other educators who come out of a tradition where learning is strongly tied to participation, to finding your voice, to developing the skills and resources of the community to bring about social change. And I think that's something we need to bring back into the Anglo-American tradition of media literacy. That in some ways the Spanish and Portuguese traditions are more closely aligned with my own work. That in the American media literacy tradition was for a long time an anti-media tradition. It was about protecting kids from media by encouraging them simply to be critical consumers and ideally turn off your TV set, shut down your games, don't go on the internet. They talk about screen time as if screen time was the problem. And my work has always seen the learner as a participant, someone who uses media as a resource, is empowered to take control over communications and to take control over cultural production and circulation and to articulate their own interest. And so while I'm not a Marxist, when I read Pablo Freire, I see someone in a language of Marxism describing a set of goals for education that are very much my own, to empower the community to speak its own concerns and to change its own environment through the effective use of storytelling, language, and media. I don't know how much those worlds are merging, but I think the new media forces us to think of the learner as a participant in ways that the older tradition of media literacy in North America really didn't speak to so well. And I think people now in the age of new media know that we can't teach people simply to be critical readers of text unless we also teach them to be critical writers of text. That the skills now are not of critical consumption, but of active participation. And that maybe connects more powerfully to some of the empowered critical literacy skills as they were understood in both the European and Latin American traditions.
Sí, más preguntas, comentarios, alguna postilla, reflexión. Sí, Carmen. Espera el micrófono.
En la universidad muchas veces, más en la universidad presencial, debido a los academicismos y formalismos, es difícil hacer entender a los alumnos que se puede llegar a aprender jugando. ¿Cómo cambiaría usted el esquema o la mente de algunos alumnos y más de alumnos para los que es una segunda carrera, alumnos más mayores? Es difícil entender este nuevo esquema.
Well, we've seen it even in the high school level, a challenge, right? We found that the students who are most advanced in their studies are often the most resistant to creative and playful activities and learning. They've been trained to give the teacher what they want in order to get an A. And as that happens, they become very goal-driven, very much about learning the curriculum as it's been given to them. And they're the most likely to say, just tell me what I need to know for the exam. Whereas the C students, the students who know that they've been left behind, who are most open to new ways of learning and most open to new experiences. They're the ones who haven't fit in the school and need to find a new way to learn that works for them. And so this is often a challenge. The people who've done best in schools are, of course, the ones who become teachers, right? And so the teachers had the hardest time of letting go of those methods that worked for them to succeed in an academic environment and to embrace methods that might allow a broader range of students to succeed at learning and incorporating the learning into their own lives. And that's part of the struggle. So it turns out that among teachers, the University of Wisconsin Ed School looked at 10 different professional groups and looked at their experiences with things like video games. And they found of those 10 groups, the teachers had the least experience playing video games when they grew up. That they were defenders of the book, but they cut themselves off from the new play cultures of the web. They cut themselves off from games and playful engagement. So when we're helping teachers learn to bring play into the classroom, we may be working with people who had very little experience of play and very little experience of learning through play. And so the first challenge is to help them learn how to play, to give them that permission I talked about, to be playful, to be creative, to know that the world is not going to fall apart. And the teachers who do that describe it as messy and frightening at first, that they didn't understand what was going on in their own classrooms. But gradually, as they watched kids who hadn't said anything all semester start to speak and start to express ideas and start to help each other learn ideas, they realized that what this messy thing was creating a powerful learning environment for these kids. And we created converts from some of these teachers. But they had to first play as learners and then play as teachers and give permission to themselves and to their students to play before those changes could be brought about. And I think that's a process of transformation, which is why right now the focus has to be on professional development for teachers to help them learn the values we're describing so they can bring them into the school.
Sí. ¿Alguna pregunta? Sí. Kelly.
No sé si voy a poder hablar.
Inténtalo.
Creo que no. No, bueno, podría ser por emoción. No, no voy a poder. Voy a tener que seguir por el correo.
Okay. Well, I will welcome your comments by mail or now.
Bueno, podría ser por la emoción, no voy a poder hablar. Pero yo quería agradecerle al profesor Jenkins esa reivindicación que hacía del lenguaje de los afectos y de las emociones en la enseñanza. Porque hablábamos esta mañana aquí de ello, ¿no? Y estoy sentada al lado de Joan, que lleva tiempo con este tema. Y yo creo que los profesores universitarios tenemos como cierta vergüenza para admitir que nos emocionamos con lo que hacemos. Los que conseguimos emocionarnos, porque la mayoría no lo consiguen. Y entonces yo creo que es una ventaja oírselo decir a él y nos pone en valor a muchas personas que creo que nos emocionamos con lo que hacemos. Y a muchos estudiantes que están por aquí que se emocionan con lo que hacemos conjuntamente, ¿no? Lo que iba a preguntarle se lo preguntaré por el correo porque no me da la voz para ello.
Sí, ¿más preguntas? Nos quedan 2 o 3 minutos para terminar. Henry.
Well, maybe I will close with a story that speaks to some of the things that I'm talking about. That years ago when I was teaching at MIT, I had a student who had said nothing all semester, who'd been making C grades. And one day we talked about Batman in class. And this kid suddenly opened up and described all of this knowledge he had about Batman and the philosophy of Batman and the ideas of Batman and so forth. And the students were amazed that this guy knew so much. And he came to my office hours right afterwards, and we continued to talk for another hour about Batman. And then 2 of my colleagues walking down the hall from the literature department looked in the doorway, saw we were talking about Batman, and said jokingly, "You can't talk about that here, this is the literature department." And the kid shut down, right? And his voice vanished. And he said nothing for the rest of the semester. So I think about that often. That moment was really powerful for me as a young faculty member. When we talk about bringing our passions and interests into school, how we I empowered that kid in my class to share what he knew when I let him talk about Batman and helped him find a way to connect it to what the class was discussing. That he suddenly felt like an expert, and he felt like he could learn and he can contribute to a learning community. And my colleagues, by drawing rigid lines about what counted and what didn't count, even in a joking way, cut him off from being able to do that. And so I think we have to think as teachers, how often do we do that? That when we tell a student that what you learn and what you care about outside of school doesn't belong in the classroom, we're also delivering the opposite message, that what we learn in the school doesn't belong in the rest of your life. And we create a wall that separates out learning. So what we're trying to do now, that kid motivates me now to try to build these connections between what kids value and the expertise they have and what we bring into our classroom. And so I hope that story stays with you and you think about the effect our attitudes in school toward popular culture have on the young people we're teaching, and how much more powerful we are when we connect with those passions, when we allow them to create and play, than when we silence them and force them to color within the lines and work within the margins of the disciplines as we've historically constructed them. The word discipline describes a body of knowledge, but it also describes punishment. And I often think we discipline students rather than empowering students by the ways we traditionally teach school subjects. So I'll close with those remarks.
Agradecemos al profesor Jenkins y esperamos contar con él próximamente en otros seminarios y en otras participaciones. Estoy diciendo que nos gustaría contar contigo en próximos seminarios y que nuestro máster esté vinculado a lo que estás haciendo desde tu universidad.